She was still there at 11:22 p.m. on a Wednesday when the rain started, not moving, not flinching, the notebook open on her knees, a pen pressed between two fingers, and her head angled beneath the amber cone of the lamp on Abercrombie Road the way a plant angles toward the only window in the room. The rain came down in thin needles and the ink on the page began to blur at the edges, and she pulled the notebook closer to her chest and kept reading. The cars that passed did not slow. The man who sold Kellowell from a charcoal pot 3 lampposts down packed his tray and draped a tarpaulin over it and went inside. The street went quiet except for the hiss of tires and the percussion of water on corrugated iron. Somewhere behind the wall. She did not go inside. There was no inside to go to, not one that had a light. She had been doing this for 6 years. And the man in the gray Volvo that slowed without stopping, then pulled to the curb 40 meters ahead and sat with the engine running. He did not know that yet. He did not know any of it. Her name was Essie Amponsa. She was 23 years old, 5 feet 2, and the day she sat her West African senior school certificate examination, she weighed 49 kilograms because she had been eating once a day for 11 months. She had kept a record of this in the back of a green exercise book, not because she was documenting suffering, but because she was documenting budget. Every meal accounted for, every centi saved, every bus fare she had walked instead of paid. The dress she wore to the examination was a dark blue cotton dress with short sleeves and a small tear at the left shoulder seam that she had sewn closed with a thread that was not quite the same shade. She had bought it 2 years earlier from a woman on the roadside near Medina Market for 4 Ghana cedis and 50 pesewas. It was clean. She washed everything by hand in the plastic basin she kept in the back corner of the room she shared with her aunt and her aunt's 2 children in a compound on a dirt road behind the Agbogba Junction. She washed clothes on Sunday evenings when the other families in the compound were eating, so nobody would see how thin the fabric had become. She carried one object everywhere, a brown leather pouch cracked at one corner with a brass clasp that her mother had pressed shut and opened 100,000 times before her hands no longer could. Her mother had bought it in the Makola market in 1997 for 3 setses. Inside it, Essie kept her student ID, a folded paper with her registration numbers written in 2 different inks, and a small photograph of her mother taken in 1999 outside a church in Accra, with her eyes closed against the sun and her hands folded at her waist. She pressed the clasp shut every morning the way her mother used to, slowly, as though what was inside required guarding. Her goal was not complicated. She wanted to be an engineer, civil engineering. She had known this since she was 12 years old and had watched the men lay pipe through the street in front of her school and had been the only child who stayed to watch from start to finish instead of going in for class. She wanted to build things that moved water to people who needed it. That was all. The smallness of the want against the size of what stood between her, and it was something she had stopped measuring, because measuring it produced an answer she could not afford to sit with. She had passed the examination with aggregate 6. There was only one school in the country where she had applied and only one department within it, and when the letter actually came, in an envelope, hand-delivered to the compound by a neighbor who knew her aunt, she had read it standing in the doorway and then folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in the leather pouch next to her mother's photograph. Her aunt had asked what it said. Essie had told her. Her aunt had nodded and gone back inside. The Department of Civil Engineering at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology was 44 kilometers from the compound in Agbogba. Essie took 2 buses every morning, the first at 5:18 a.m. from the junction before the road got crowded, the second from Circle to Kumasi Road. She arrived by 7:45 on good mornings, 8:10 on bad ones. She had been late to a morning lecture exactly twice in 3 years. Both times the bus had broken down. The problem was not the distance. The problem was the electricity. The compound had power between 7 a.m. and roughly 8:30 p.m. on the nights when load shedding did not happen. Load shedding happened 4 nights a week. On those nights the compound went dark, and Essie's room went dark, and the aunt's children would be asleep by 9, and Essie would sit at the table in the dark for 15 minutes because she had learned to wait, to make sure the darkness was going to hold. And then she would put her notebook and her textbook and her pen into her bag and walk the 12 minutes to Abercrombie Road and sit under the lamp. She had found the lamp in her first week of school. She had evaluated 5 different lamps on that road over the course of one night. walking from one to the next with her notebook open, testing the radius of light against the page. This one, the one closest to the junction, slightly brighter than the others, shielded on one side by a low concrete wall that blocked the wind, was the best. She had sat under it on every dark night for 6 years. The lecturers at NUS did not know this. The registrar did not know this. The department administrator, a man named Mr. Frimpong, who wore the same brown jacket every day and stamped forms with a precision that suggested he had been stamping forms since before most of his students were born. He did not know this either. What they knew was that A.C.M. Pansa submitted every assignment before the deadline, answered questions in class with a precision that occasionally embarrassed other students, and had the highest cumulative grade point average in the third-year civil engineering cohort. What they knew was the output. They did not know the lamp. Her study partner knew. A girl named Abena, who lived in university accommodation and who had once, in second year, suggested gently that Essie could study in her room on dark nights, and whom Essie had thanked quietly and never taken up on it, because the offer had been made out of pity, and Essie had made a decision early on about pity. The decision was this: pity from other people required you to accept their understanding of your situation as the defining frame, and Essie had her own frame, and it did not include pity. Mr. Frimpong had noticed, in passing, that Essie always sat in the row closest to the window in every classroom. He had not connected this to anything. Professor Khaled Mensa had noticed other things. He was 58 years old, had taught structural engineering and hydraulics at NUST for 22 years, and had authored 3 textbooks that were in use at 6 universities across West Africa. He drove a 2008 gray Volvo V70 with 287,000 kilometers on the clock and a broken rear passenger window that he had sealed with tape and cardboard 18 months ago and not fixed because he kept forgetting to fix it. He lived in a house on Nyeso Road in Kumasi that he shared with 2 dogs, a housekeeper named Pauline, who came on Mondays and Thursdays, and a silence that had thickened steadily since his wife Beatrice passed away 4 years ago. He had stopped attending faculty social events. He had stopped laughing. He had stopped caring about anything that did not have a direct engineering application or a direct human one. A.C.M. Pansa had a direct human application. He had first noticed her because of a structural calculation she submitted in his hydraulics class in second year. He had read it 3 times, not because it was wrong, it was not wrong, because it was correct in a way that suggested she had approached the problem from a direction he had not expected, using a method he had not taught, deriving the same result through a path that was, if he was being honest with himself, more elegant than the one he had shown in class. He had not said this to her. He had given her the mark and moved on, and then gone home and opened the paper again and traced her method with his finger the way a person traces a route on a map they have not traveled before. She had done the same thing in third year, twice. Different problems, same phenomenon. A mind that did not walk the path it had been shown but found a parallel one that arrived at the same destination by more efficient means it was. He had written in his personal notebook at home, the kind of thinking that built things that lasted. He had written down her name. He had not done anything with it, because what he was feeling, a kind of protective alertness, the sense that something rare and fragile was also being tested in ways it should not have to be tested, was an emotion. And Professor Mensa did not have a protocol for emotions. He had protocols for everything else. It was the 3rd week of November, a Wednesday, and he had stayed late at the faculty office, reviewing a proposal from a construction company in Takoradi that wanted 3 of his postgraduate students for a 6-month site placement. He had been reading the proposal for 4 hours. His driver had called at 9 to say his car was ready, a warning light that had turned out to be nothing, and he had driven home through Kumasi and past the university perimeter and down the long road toward Accra at 5 kilometers above the speed limit because the road was empty and it was 1:18 p.m. and he wanted to be home. He saw her from a distance of 40 meters. He knew who she was immediately. The way you know a specific tree you have passed 100 times in daylight when you pass it at night, the particular proportion of things, the specific angle of stillness. He slowed without meaning to. Then he pulled to the curb and sat with the engine running and both hands on the steering wheel and looked in the rearview mirror at the girl sitting under the lamp on Abakobi Road with a notebook against her chest and rain on her face and a pen still in her hand. She did not look up. She was reading. If this story is doing what I think it is doing to you right now, Stay with me, because what Professor Mensa does next, and what EC says when he does it, is the part of this story that the rain was always falling toward. He sat in the car for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Then he turned off the engine and got out. The rain had lightened to a mist by then. He walked back along the road with his hands in the pockets of his jacket and stopped 2 meters from her. He did not speak immediately. He stood there until she looked up, and she did look up, not startled, not afraid, with the calm of someone who has been alone in the dark often enough that the arrival of another person does not break her concentration. It merely redirects it. She looked at him. He looked at her. "How many nights?" he said, not a full question. 3 words. She answered without hesitation. "Since first year. Every dark night?" "Every dark night. The assignment requires it." He stood there for another moment. Then he said, "Come," and turned and walked back toward his car. She did not move immediately. She looked at the lamp, then at the notebook, then at the leather pouch in her bag. Then she stood and closed the notebook carefully, not quickly, carefully, and put the pen between the pages as a marker and tucked the pouch under her arm and followed him. He drove without speaking for most of the journey. She sat in the passenger seat with the notebook on her lap and the leather pouch held flat against her thigh and watched the road. When they turned onto a street she did not recognize, she registered the name on the corner, Nyayeso Road. She stored it. The house was not large for a professor's house, which surprised her. It was clean in the way that houses are clean when someone has been keeping them clean for reasons that are no longer social. Pauline had left a pot of soup on the stove covered with a plate. Mensa turned on the lights in what appeared to be a study, a room with a long table, 4 chairs, 2 shelves of engineering texts, a standing lamp in the corner, and a window that faced the garden. He turned on the lamp. He placed a key on the table. "This is a spare key," he said. "The house is on generator when the grid goes. If you need to study and you cannot, come here. Pauline will let you in before I arrive if I am at the faculty. There is a desk. There is always electricity." She looked at the key. She looked at him. "I'm not offering this out of pity," he said. "I have read your calculations. You are the best structural thinker in your year, possibly in the last 5 years of this department. Pity has nothing to do with it." She picked up the key and held it in her palm. "I want to tell you one thing," she said. "Go ahead. I didn't study under the lamp because I had no choice. I studied under the lamp because it was the option that preserved the most dignity. Abina offered her room in 2nd year. I said no. If I had wanted a room, I would have found one." He looked at her for a moment. "Then why did you follow me just now?" "Because you asked a different question," she said. "You didn't offer me a room because you felt sorry for me. You asked how many nights you were counting." He did not reply to that. He went to the kitchen and came back with a mug of ginger tea and set it on the desk beside her. Then he left her to study. He did not tell the department what he had done. He did not tell Pauline why there was sometimes a student in the study on dark evenings. He did not write it in any form or report. He had simply removed one obstacle from the path of a mind that did not need sympathy, that did not need rescue, that needed only electricity. What happened in the 6 months that followed was not a rescue story. It was something closer to a discovery, or rather, a series of discoveries that had already been made being confirmed. Essie completed her 3rd-year project on water distribution systems in peri-urban communities in northern Ghana and submitted it to Professor Mensa for feedback. He read it in 2 sessions and returned it with 4 notes in the margins. One of them read, "This methodology could form the basis of a funded research proposal." The second read, CMO et al. 2019, "Your argument supersedes theirs by 3 years." The third was a question. The fourth was not a note but a number. The reference code for a graduate scholarship, the faculty that was accepting applications in 14 days she applied. She submitted her application at 8:47 a.m., 11 days before the deadline, in a brown envelope with her registration number written in 2 different inks. Inside the leather pouch on her way to the submission office, her mother's photograph sat folded against the edge of her student ID. She received the scholarship letter 6 weeks later. Full tuition, a monthly stipend of GHS, a faculty workstation with 24-hour access. She read it as standing in the compound in Agbogba on a morning when the light was good, and the compound was quiet, and her aunt's children were in school. Then she folded it along its original creases and put it in the pouch next to her mother's photograph and pressed the brass clasp shut. Her aunt asked what it said. "I'll be moving to campus," Essie said. I'll send money for the children's school fees from the stipend." Her aunt looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that was not pride and not surprise, but something that took the shape of both without being either. She nodded. She went back inside. The campus workstation was on the third floor of the engineering block, with a window that faced west. In the evenings, the light came through it in long yellow angles that fell across the desk. Essie noted this on the first day and positioned her chair to maximize it. Old habits are not always failures. Sometimes they are just optimization. Professor Mensah saw her in the faculty corridor 2 days after she moved in and asked if the workstation was suitable. She said it was. He nodded and walked past. That was all. 3 weeks after she moved to campus, a man named Obinna Achebe arrived at the faculty office. He was 39 years old and wore a charcoal suit and carried a briefcase with the logo of an infrastructure development firm embossed on the front. Achebe Keta Engineering Consulting, offices in Accra, Abuja, and London. He had a meeting with the department head about a graduate partnership. He was shown around the research wing. He stopped in the corridor outside the postgraduate offices and looked through the glass panel in the door. Essie was at her workstation. She was not aware she was being observed. She had a structural drawing spread across the desk and was marking load distribution points with a red pen, and had 3 reference books open at different pages, and had written a sequence of calculations in the upper margin of the drawing that were not standard. Achebe stood at the glass for approximately 45 seconds. Then he asked the administrator who she was. Mr. Frimpong, still in his brown jacket, told him her name. Achebe wrote it down. He came back the following Thursday with a proposal that was not for a graduate partnership. It was for a 3-year junior research associate position, based in Accra, with a salary of GHS 6,500 per month, travel to project sites in Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal, and a co-publication clause that would put her name on every technical report the firm produced that drew from her methodology. He placed the proposal in a folder with the firm's letterhead and asked Mr. Frimpong to deliver it to Isi Ampansa directly. She read it at her workstation that afternoon, with the late light coming through the west window. She sat with it for a long time, not because she was undecided, because she had been counting the same 3 coins for 22 minutes in a pharmacy at 11:51 p.m. on a Tuesday in second year, standing in fluorescent light with a textbook under one arm and a list of things she needed but could not afford, and some proportion of her still could not accept the distance between that fluorescent light and the light coming through the City's window right now. She let herself feel that distance for exactly the amount of time it required. Then she picked up her pen. She wrote one question on the cover of the folder. Will this work include rural water access projects? She sent it back to Mr. Frimpong, who relayed it to Achebe, who called the faculty office from Accra that same evening, and confirmed that it would, that in fact the firm's current pipeline included a 2-year water infrastructure project in the Upper West region that had been stalled for 8 months because the lead engineer had left, that the stall was specifically a structural hydraulics problem, and that when he had seen her calculations through the glass panel, he had recognized immediately what the stall needed. She accepted the offer the following morning. Before she left the campus, she walked to Professor Mensah's office and knocked. He called her in. She stood in the doorway and told him what she had accepted and what the position was. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "The Upper West Project. You know it? I was on the review panel that flagged the structural problem 8 months ago." He paused. "I wrote a note that said the firm needed someone who could approach load distribution from a non-standard direction." She looked at him. "I wasn't thinking of you specifically," he said. "I hadn't met you yet. But you had read my calculations," she said. "Yes," he said. "I had read your calculations." There was a silence in the room that had the quality of something being confirmed rather than something being said for the first time. She unclipped the leather pouch from her bag and opened the brass clasp and took out the small photograph of her mother outside the church in 1999 with her eyes closed against the sun. She placed it on his desk facing him. "My mother wanted to be a civil engineer," she said. "She qualified in 1995. She could not afford postgraduate school. She became a seamstress. She died when I was 13. I kept studying because the alternative was to accept that the door she couldn't open was still closed." Professor Mensah looked at the photograph for a long time. His hands were very still on the desk. "The door is not closed," he said. "No," Isi said. "It isn't. She picked up the photograph and returned it to the pouch. She pressed the brass clasp shut. Then she thanked him quietly, once, and left. This is what Essie Ponce carried for 6 years under a street lamp on Abercrombie Road. Not poverty, not difficulty, not the injustice of studying in the rain while other students slept in lit rooms. She carried her mother's uncompleted path and the knowledge that she had inherited the skill to complete it, if she could only find enough light. The world will deny you electricity before it denies you a destiny. It will make you walk 12 minutes to a lamppost. It will let the rain in. It will send buses that break down, and rooms that go dark, and institutions that process forms without ever once looking up to see who is standing at the counter. This is not a story about a professor who stopped his car. It is a story about what the car found, about what had already been built, in the dark with pen and paper and a brass clasp that had been pressed shut by hands that were no longer there to press it. You cannot take what a person has built by refusing to light the room. The building goes on in the dark. The calculations keep their logic when the lamp flickers. The mind that is working does not stop working because someone has not thought to provide a desk for it. What the world withholds from people it has decided not to see is comfort, not capacity. It is never capacity. And what those people carry, in a pouch with a cracked corner, in a green exercise book where every SETI is counted, in a methodology that arrives at the right answer by an unexpected road, that cannot be removed by a building manager who turns off the lights or a grid that goes dark 4 nights a week. It was never in the building. It was never in the light. It was already there. The first water distribution system Essie Ponce designed in the Upper West region served 14 communities across a distance of 23 kilometers and was completed 7 weeks ahead of schedule. At the commissioning ceremony on the afternoon of February 11th, a woman filled a plastic cup from the first functional tap and drank from it and pressed the cup against her chest the way you press something when you want to feel that it is real. Essie stood at the edge of the crowd and watched. She did not make a speech. She had already said everything in the drawings. If someone told you that you had to build the thing you wanted most in the dark, literally, with no electricity, with rain on your face and ink blurring at the edges of the page, would you sit down and begin? Not if you were lucky. Not if conditions improved now, tonight, under whatever light was still on. Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.